Welcome to In Depth with Academia. I'm Richard Price, CEO of academia.edu, and I'm so glad you're joining me today. On this episode, I'm going to talk through a fascinating piece of historical research by Rafał Reichert, focused on the trade of timber from the Southern Baltic in the supply strategies of the Spanish Royal Navy between 1714 and 1795. That's a huge span of time, about 80 years filled with wars, reforms, and global competition. A century where ships mattered. Well, not just for prestige, but for the survival of entire empires. Now, before I jump in, just a reminder, I'm sharing the gist of this paper, presenting what it puts forward. I'm not here to judge, endorse, or say this is the only way to see things. Research always gives us stuff to chew on, right? It's rarely, if ever, the last word. So let's use these findings as a way to think more deeply about the past and, maybe even what it tells us about supply chains and global strategy today. All right, so what's the core problem Reichert's paper is tackling? Well, he's really digging into how the Spanish Navy, an institution newly reorganized in 1714, managed to get the massive amounts of timber it needed for its shipyards across Spain and its overseas territories. Why does this matter? Imagine a world power trying to keep its fleet afloat without the right wood, oak, pine, all those big sturdy timbers for masts, hulls, and so on. Spain was competing with Britain, France, the Dutch, and all of them, it turns out, were hunting for the same critical resources across Europe and even across the Atlantic. It's almost like an 18th century version of, say, competing for oil or, microchips today. So what does the paper actually do? Reichert focuses particularly on the flow of Baltic timber, wood shipped from areas like Gdansk, Riga, Memel, Königsberg, places in today's Poland, Lithuania, Russia. He uses all sorts of historical documents like customs data from Denmark's Sundtol, contracts, diplomatic reports, even archives of big aristocratic families involved in the trade. A lot of these documents are, just tons of data, like boat arrivals, what the cargo was, which Spanish ports it all wound up in, Cadiz, El Ferrol, Cartagena, and so forth. The key insights? First, Spain didn't just depend on one source for timber. Spanish forests, it turns out, were getting depleted or just weren't enough, so they turned to the Baltic, especially as international tensions made traditional routes risky or outright blocked. Spanish officials cut deals with Dutch, Swedish, and later even Prussian and Russian merchants to move timber on a huge scale. This was especially true during the mid-18th century, when Spain was constantly playing catch-up in the naval arms race. There's another layer too, the changing ways the Spanish state and its contractors tried to manage this. Sometimes they bought direct, sometimes they gave monopolistic contracts, like the Dutch Gildemeister family or Swedish trading houses in the late 1700s, got big deals to supply Spanish arsenals. And the data shows these imports really took off in certain periods, like during the American War of Independence, when Spain was fighting Britain again and needed every ship it could build. Something I find kind of wild, maybe not wild, but notable, is how all this trade was also tangled up with diplomacy and even espionage. Spanish diplomats in Russia, Sweden, Denmark, sometimes they were unofficially sniffing around to see what their rivals were building, where the best trees grew, all that cloak and dagger stuff, trade, war, and intelligence. Wow, right? Wasn't just about cutting trees. Let me digress for a second. Have you ever thought about how many things in history boil down to just getting the right stuff to the right place at the right time? It's like, back then it was oak trunks, now it's semiconductor chips, but the logistics headaches never seem to go away. Anyway, kind of makes you wonder what we'll be scrambling for in the next century. Hopefully not timber. Back to the paper. Reichert's study doesn't just list facts. He tries to show the connections between Spanish naval strength, international business networks, and political change. The Spanish state's ability to tap into Baltic wood supplies wasn't just luck. It was the result of adapting, negotiating, sometimes failing and trying again. So, what does this mean for you? If you're just listening because you love history, or maybe you work in logistics, or just wonder how the world turns, well, I'd say understanding how big organizations deal with resource shortages, political risks, and supply chain disruptions is timeless. Today's news about critical minerals or global shipping, it's playing an old tune with new instruments. And again, Just to stress, I'm not endorsing Reichert's interpretation or saying this model fits every case, but it's a reminder that academic research can spotlight connections you might never have expected. All right, that's about all we have time for today. If you want to read the actual paper, remember to check out Rafał B. Reichert's work. The details are on academia.edu. If you search for timber, Baltic trade, and Spanish Navy, and if you have questions or want to suggest a topic, reach out. Remember, research isn't absolute truth. It's an invitation to question, explore, and keep digging. Thanks for tuning in to In Depth with Academia. Hope you'll join me again soon for more journeys into the world of ideas. Take care.